Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to talk about a topic today that is very dear to my own heart and actually is a topic that is constantly being discussed about in Microsoft and with the partners and customers that I meet as the Lync Product Marketing Manager. And the topic is user adoption, or really simply, how do we get users to use the technology that we put in place? And it's an area that I've been involved with in my career at Microsoft, because before I became a marketing manager, one of my previous roles was as a user experience consultant. So actually going into companies and working with the different teams to understand what do they want to get from the technology, how do we put that in place, and how do we actually get their users using it. So I'm going to put a warning on this presentation. I have no network diagrams whatsoever, which I think is probably a first for a Lync presentation. I'm going to start with a video. And the video is actually a study in leadership, but it also has some very interesting things to look at in terms of human behavior and how a change and a movement develops. So I'd like you to just have a look at that for the next couple of minutes, and then we'll have a look at what does that mean from a technology perspective.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point, and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is overglorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
So what do we learn from that? I guess hands up, who's seen that video before? Yeah, you do come across it on leadership training. So why am I showing this to you today? Well, for me, there's quite a lot of lessons we can learn from this in terms of thinking about technology and driving change into an organization. And I think kind of one of the first things to sort of call out here is this whole notion of a lone nut. Now, some of you in the room may actually be the lone nut in your organization. I know certainly right now, stood here, I feel a little bit like a lone nut, and I'm looking for my first followers.
I'll be next.
And I think, recognizing those individuals, whether it's you or whether it's people in your organization who are brave enough to start innovation, to have that courage to stand up and do something a little bit different with a technology, and also looking for the people who are following them. And once you recognize those people, it's giving them the support and the recognition that will then lead to that movement being formed and the tipping point where other people will come and join. I think the second message from this video is being easy to follow. So if you are doing a technology project, do people really understand why you are doing it? Is it simple for them to get on board, to copy what you're doing? So the dancing guy had really simple dancing movements. Everyone knew exactly what he was doing and how they could join in. The third point from the video is actually people are different and people adapt to change at very different rates. You get the guys who stand up first of all and are proud to be the kind of early adopters to be doing this stuff. But then you have other people who are a little bit more risk averse and they like to be part of the crowd. And in the end, you reach that tipping point where actually there were more people dancing than there were sitting down. And actually, you want to be dancing because you don't want to be the odd people who are sitting down. Now, from a change perspective, there are three different buckets of people when it comes to change. And everyone in this room will fall somewhere along this scale. So on the left, we have our conservers. And they make up around 25% of the population. Now, the thing about conservers is they can get on board with change, but they need to see that it's incremental change. So what's really important for these people is to understand the mapping from old to new, so that they feel like there's a common thread between their old world of technology and the new technology that's coming in. And this is something that you need to think about in your communication plan, whether it's training or communicating about the new piece of software that you're putting in place. At the other end of the scale, you've got originators, and they, again, form 25% of the population. Now, originators love change. They get very excited about new stuff. So when you're communicating to originators, it's really important to talk about the new ways of working. So what are they going to be able to do differently, perhaps for the first time, with the technology that you're putting in place? And that's how you get them excited and get them on board. And then in the middle, we have 50% of the population who tend to be pragmatists. So they can cope with change, but they like to understand that it's got a good reason, there's a purpose to it, it's a functional change. So again, thinking about your communication and your readiness planning, how are you going to address the three different buckets of people in terms of their needs around change? And I think the kind of other point on this is it's good to have a blend of these people in your project teams because they will bring different skills and they'll have different objectives depending on where they fall on this change attitude curve. So that's kind of a bit of a general picture about people and behavior and change. And what I want to do today is to take you through a few specific examples of unified communication change and best practices and lessons learned. And this is information I've got from going out to talk to partners and customers about their experience of putting specifically Microsoft Lync in place, but it could be any unified communications technology. I'm not going to do any kind of product or sales pitch for Microsoft here. It's all about people and how we get change in place. So the first revelation, and this was one that the IT teams were telling me, that actually the risk with a unified communications project is if it starts in IT, is piloted by IT, the risk is it stays in IT. And you end up with this whole syndrome of not invented here, the business doesn't want to hear it, they just see it as an IT playground. So there's some really important lessons here to think about. How are you, as an IT team, going to engage your business stakeholders really early on in the decision-making process? Ideally during the sales cycle when you're choosing what technology you're going to put in place. So kind of the key thing here is having a common vocabulary. And I think one of the risks with unified communications is people tend to talk about networks and all of that good stuff. But you know what? HR teams don't really want to talk about that. They want to talk about things like how to attract talent into the organization. They want to look at how can they support flexible working. How can they support a diverse workforce that perhaps are coming in with a consumer background and have high expectations around unified communications? So I think, first of all, understanding that you'll need to adapt your language to communicate with the business is absolutely key. So some of the techniques that we use at Microsoft to help bridge the gap between technology teams and business teams is to take a user-centered design approach. And we look at things like creating personas for different roles across the business that will allow the technology team to really get into the shoes of the users that will be using the technology. Now, this is an example of a storyboard. And you'll see there's no diagrams on here that talk about the technology, but there's a very simple storyline through the storyboard that shows how the business users are coming together to collaborate through a Lync room meeting session. And this is something that anyone could pick up and read and understand what the scenario is and how the technology is supporting that. And at the bottom in blue is a little bit about the technology and what's being delivered, but it's something that is very familiar to anyone. You don't need to be technical to understand it. And we find that using this kind of content, this kind of approach, really helps build the relationship between the IT team and the business team. So I guess the question is, who could do that kind of work? You know, who is going to take these business requirements, talk to the business, and translate them into technology requirements? So one of the other recurring themes that's come out from everyone I've spoken to is that you need to have someone in that business analyst role. And it might be someone who's already in the IT team who can make that transition, or it might be that you need to bring someone in specifically to fulfill that. And their job is absolutely to talk to the business stakeholders, understand their pain points, bring them back to the IT team, and turn them into technology requirements. So that's really key. The other interesting point on this is it's quite easy for a business analyst or IT team to get quite deferential to the business. And that's not always a good thing. So challenging constructively with art of the possible type workshops is a really good thing to do. And I'll give you an example of something that happened to me when I was a user experience consultant. So I was working on a global intranet with an insurance company based in London. And they had an existing intranet, and the senior leaders there were able to post blog posts and kind of chat room updates. But they never used to do it themselves. They used to allow their PAs to actually post on their behalf because they were far too busy to write their own content and actually publish it. So when they came to us, they wanted an intranet that was going to be a cloud solution, and they wanted to replicate exactly that same kind of imposter type scenario. Now, we said to them, A, technically, we don't think we can do this. It's a cloud solution. We're really limiting the custom development. We'd like you to think differently. And actually, you've got a real opportunity here to change the way in which your leadership team are communicating with the rest of the company. And we would like you to go back and ask your leadership team to try creating their own posts. So they did. And the most amazing thing was that the new chat room that we put in place became the most popular part of the intranet, because the end employees realized that it was actually the genuine voice of their leadership team talking to them directly through the intranet. Now, if we'd not pushed back, that wouldn't have happened. They would have carried on doing what they did before. They would have just kept with the status quo, and they would never have transformed their communication culture in the way that actually happened. So you've got to be brave. In a way, you've got to be that lone nut and stand up to the business as well and challenge them on what they're doing. Just because they did something before doesn't mean to say it's the right thing to carry on doing when you have new tools available to you. So the next area I want to talk about are the people. And again, this is quite specific to unified communications. There are two groups of people that emerged as absolutely critical to consulting and getting on board with a unified communication project if it's going to succeed. And the two groups were PAs, or personal assistants, and people managers. So why are PAs so critical to this? So if you think about it, everything a PA does centers around communication. They're taking calls, they're transferring calls, they're dealing right across the company on behalf of senior leaders. And if you don't make their lives easier, they are going to make your project very, very difficult. They have the ear of the senior leaders in the business, and they also tend to know lots of people across the organization. So they are hugely influential when it comes to a group of users. So you need to get them on board early. And one of the techniques that's really successful for doing this is to actually get a user champion who can represent that PA community and be part of your pilot projects to understand what are their needs, what do they do today that they need to carry on doing, but also what will they be able to do differently in the new world. And I think I found this a really useful anecdote actually from one of the customers I spoke to. They actually had to do a kind of mapping of old to new for their PAs when they went through their training. So they talked about phone lines and how you would have a busy phone line before, but actually in the new world of unified communications, you would have a presence indicator. And actually that was far more powerful than just an engaged busy line. And they also looked at things like speed dial. So again, speed dial maps quite nicely into a contacts list in a unified communications solution. And they put together training material that specifically went from old to new. And if you think about the whole change curve, that really helps those people who fall into that conserver bracket. They can see the common thread of what they used to do and what it's like in the new world. So they took them on that journey. The next part of this, and this is particularly true for PAs, but it's true for anyone using the technology, it's really important to fit the glass slipper. Now, what do I mean by that? So when you think about it, putting a unified communication platform in place, whether that's Lync or anything else, and asking people to move from a desk phone to potentially using a headset is a physical intrusion of their space and their experience. But for many people, that headset is absolutely their experience of the platform. And if they're not happy with that, they will blame the software for their experience. So actually taking some time and getting good quality headsets is absolutely critical. And again, this came out with every single conversation I had with customers and partners. Now, the thing about headsets is there's so many devices out there. Where do you start? So this is where it's really important to understand how your users are going to be interacting with the software. Are they going to be at a desk? Are they going to be in a noisy environment? Are they going to be out and about on the road? Do they like one ear, two ear, wired? All of those things. You can build up a profile for each role and identify the best headsets or desk phones to help them do their role better and to make most use of the technology. And if you get that right, you're halfway there in terms of getting users to want to change to the new technology. But absolutely, number one, do not scrimp on headsets. Really take care over it. The second group of people to look at are the people managers. So they're hugely influential because what they do in terms of behavior will set the tone for the whole of their team. And they're quite a hard group to get on board. So some of the things that customers that I've spoken to have done is they look at specific people management training around how to manage a high-performing virtual team. You know, people managers themselves are going through change and in terms of they can't necessarily see the people around them. They have to communicate through instant messaging. You know, the whole world is changing around one-to-ones, being able to manage global teams through video calling. So they need some help to understand what's the best way to use their technology to build closer relationships with their team. I think the other point on this as well is that there's this whole thing around etiquette. And if a company is putting unified communications in for the first time, people don't necessarily know what's expected of them. So things like presence, you know, do I leave my presence on? What if I'm busy, what does that mean? You know, my manager's going to be checking up on me. So having training that the manager and the team understand how presence is used to advertise your availability to be contacted throughout the organization, but also you don't have to respond immediately. If someone instant messages you, but you're busy, that's okay. And the other point is going outwards, you can instant message other people to get a quicker answer to the things you want to do. And you know, if we're living and breathing unified communications ourselves, we think that's really simple to understand. But if people are experiencing this for the first time in the workplace, don't make assumptions that they know this stuff. You know, allow people to step through and understand what the new technology needs and how they can adapt their behaviour to get the best from it. So from a culture perspective, unified communications definitely changes the way in which teams and managers work. And if I look at the change that's happened in Microsoft around our performance management process, so we used to have a very rigid process. We had an annual assessment at the end of the year, and we had a kind of mid-year check-in as well. And we've moved to a quarterly assessment now. So we have a quarterly connection meeting with our manager. And it's a much more fluid dialogue where you look at what you're going to do for the next quarter and you check in on what you've done in the previous quarter. And unified communications is, because it changes the way in which people are working, and it changes this whole thing around you're not necessarily present at your desk, but your manager needs to understand, what are you doing? Are you having the right impact? Are you focusing on the right output? Does lead to a change in performance management. So it's something to be talking about with HR teams when considering a unified communication strategy. And I think the customers I've spoken to who've put UC in have definitely reported a change in the relationship between managers and teams, and much more of a rapport being built, because through IM you can generate a more casual relationship and sort of little micro moments of contacting your manager that doesn't have to wait for, say, a monthly meeting. So the last area I wanted to cover was user familiarisation, or training and readiness. And there's a few things here, again, that have emerged from the conversations I've had. The first point is that users learn in very different ways. You know, some users are visual learners, some users like to read the content up front. Some will wait to launch day before and then they expect just to be handheld the minute the thing goes live. So when you're considering your rollout planning and your training, you've got to cater for all those different learning styles. And one of the most effective techniques that have come out from the kind of launch period is to have floor walkers. So people who are easily identifiable, they might be wearing a t-shirt or something, that people know that they are a super user of the software, they are a champion that they can go to and they can just help people there and then. First impressions really count, and you want to make sure that when you launch something, you've got the right people in place to support those people who are getting that technology for the first time. And floor walkers have another benefit because they are your eyes and ears on the ground. So they can let you know if there are certain pockets that perhaps aren't getting it, or perhaps there's some teething problems there. So they can feed back to the project team on what's really going on. The other area to really think about carefully is your new starter readiness. So anything that you do for your launch, you make sure you bake it into new starter programs as well. And new starters are a really interesting community in themselves, because if they're coming into a business, they may be coming in from a graduate program, they're potentially a younger generation, and they will have expectations about unified communication technology, but they also are your way to help change culture. So, you know, new starters are a specific community in themselves, and it's definitely worth taking some time to think about how can they become champions for you across the business. The other trend I've noticed is having competitions to celebrate when people are working differently and collaborating differently. You know, it's back to this lone nut thing. You spot someone doing something great, you need to call attention to it, you need to celebrate it. So how are you working with people managers to call out really great collaborative behaviour that would not have been possible had you not put that UC platform in place? And I think the other thing is you've got to eat your own dog food. You know, you're putting this technology in place as a project team. You need to use the technology. You need to live and breathe it as part of the project training. And when you think you've got your user champions in place in the different communities, and they start using it and collaborating, and then they can start to spread the word as well. So make sure you put the technology in place at the start of the project. And then the last thing to look at is really usage and analytics. So these can really come in handy when you want to get an objective view of what's really going on and which part of the organisation are actually using which features. Because you may have some black holes and that there are people who perhaps haven't received the communications or don't understand it. You need to go back and revisit them with specific training. But the analytics can really help you customise the training to the different teams across the business and make sure they're really getting the full benefit of the platform. And that's it. So from a takeaways perspective, it's find and support your lone nuts. You know, don't be afraid to follow someone if they're doing something great, because that's how change happens. You need to think about the different types of users and their attitude to change and make sure you flex the readiness and communication plans to deal with everyone across that change curve. Look to put business analysts in place who can perform that translation between the business and technology. Find those influential users, the PAs, the people managers. There may be other roles in your organisation who are absolutely critical to the business. And you know, these kind of rock stars need to be on board with what you're doing, so engage them early and get champions from the community. Fit your glass slippers and tailor the training for the different styles of people. And then lastly, get people to play with the technology. You know, play is where creativity comes from, and you want people to be inspired by the technology that you're putting in place. So it's all right to have fun at work. And that's it. So there's a few resources that do relate to Lync that cover things like training and emails and all of that good stuff. So if this isn't something that you've done before, we have stuff that can absolutely help you do that, both from a Lync perspective. And we've just launched the Office 365 Customer Success Centre, which goes into, again, some of these key scenarios, some of that sort of storyboarding type stuff. So if you need to have conversations with the business and you don't feel like you've got the right resources in place, please do visit these links because I think you'll find something there to help. And that's it. Thank you very much.